Forgiveness is really for us and not others. How many of us have heard that phrase or something similar or have used it ourselves? I think it's a fairly common occurrence in the church. And it immediately comes to mind as we listen to the parable this morning in Matthew. But the thing about that phrase is that there's a lot of truth to it. Forgiveness, in a lot of ways, really is about ourselves. It has less to do about the person who caused the harm or the pain, but it's about us letting go of the pain, the woundedness of it. And thus why I think it's a common phrase that we use, and it's good. Because often when we think about forgiveness, what do we immediately jump to? The people who've hurt us, right? The people or the institutions that have caused us pain and hurt. It's about the wounds that we carry. And when we look at it and think about it in that way, then forgiveness really is about what's going on with us. Because it's about letting go of that weight, of letting go of the poison that our anger and our frustration and animosity can do to our souls. Forgiveness, in this sense, when we think about how we are harmed by others, it liberates us. It frees us from the weight of that. So it no longer controls us, and we are given new life because of it. And there's more to forgiveness. Because while that statement is very much true, I think we can critique it. Because just as much that forgiveness is for us, it is for the other person as well. And we get into that a little bit today in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I want to contextualize that for a moment, this parable, before we dive too deep into it. The first is that I'm sure some of us were bristling at the slave language in this. When you look at the Greek text, this is a more accurate translation. That's what Dr. Gaffney is doing here. Often in our other translations, it's softened and called servant. But really, we're talking about enslavement, and not in the way that we understand it here in our country, but in an economic sense that used to function for centuries, but particularly during this time period. And so I just want to name where that language comes from. So Peter comes to Jesus and asks how many times we ought to forgive. And I think in that moment, Peter's probably thinking about those who harm us. And Jesus could have responded with a story or a parable that would have talked about forgiveness in relationship to harm that people cause us and our emotions, but he doesn't. Rather, we get this parable that is steeped in the economic and social inequalities of his day. And so I invite us today to reflect on forgiveness, not in terms of responding to harm, but in how we respond to debt, to indebtedness, to feeling that we owe someone or someone owes us something. And to add another little piece of context to this, so we understand the magnitude of what's being forgiven in the parable. The first enslaved person is forgiven a debt of 10,000 talents. A denarii is a day's wage during Jesus' time. And 100 denarii equates to 1 talent. So if you have 10,000 talents that you owe, in modern day money, that is millions. This is an amount that could never be repaid. This is an amount that just in one lifetime you couldn't come to it working your daily wage. And so when the human ruler in this parable forgives the debt, what that person is doing is freeing this person to a new life. Just imagine for a moment if you owed someone $1,000, let alone millions of dollars, and it was forgiven. The weight that can come off of us, particularly if we are strapped cash-wise and we've got families we're taking care of, to be forgiven our financial debts and our financial obligations in that sense, all of a sudden can change the course of a life. I think about a moment that I had in college Right before, or a couple years before I went off to college, my grandmother died. And the consequence of that was we inherited my grandmother's dog, a little white toy poodle named Lucy. Member of the family for as long as I can remember, and we treated her as such. But when I transitioned to college in my first year, our family situations were changing, and my mom could no longer take care of her. There just wasn't the space to do it. And so all of a sudden we were in this place of, we have to find a place for her or we have to send her to the SPCA, which when you're talking about a beloved pet, that's hard. But when it's a beloved pet of someone whom you loved just as much, even harder. Fortunately for me and my family, a friend of mine that I just met, only known her a month in college, called her parents and talked to them about this before even mentioning it to me. And we grew up in the same town, we just didn't meet until we got to college. But her family offered to take our dog in, to take Lucy in, which was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And what all of us thought would be a month or two just to figure out what was going to happen turned into 2.5 years. And Lucy was older, which meant medical issues started coming up. And over the course of those 2.5 years, she needed a lot of assistance that our family couldn't give her, that I couldn't give her. And this family, without asking them to, took that on. And after about 2.5 years after that, the family finally reached out and said, we can no longer take care of her at this point. We've had some finances that we've had to throw out or kind of put out to help care for her, and we can't carry this anymore. Which fortunately, our situation changed and Lucy could move back home with us, and it was wonderful. But immediately after bringing Lucy home, I felt the pressure of an indebtment, of a great thing that I owe this family for caring so tenderly and passionately about somebody, a piece of my family that was important to me. And it wasn't an insignificant amount of money that they put out. We're talking not hundreds, but thousands of dollars. And so while they never asked for a penny of it, I felt the obligation to fulfill that debt, to pay it back. And so as I'm in college and working, doing all those things, I'm saving my pennies. And about 6 months after we picked her up, I mailed them a check for 1/3 of the amount. The following week, I get a card in the mail back from them, acknowledging what I had sent, thanking me for it, and said, "You have no obligation to pay us back. All of this is forgiven. Do not let it weigh on your mind." And my friends, for me in that moment, that was liberation. That was life. For a college student coming from a family that had to work and scrimp and save to get me there, it would have been a hindrance and a burden to pay that back, though I felt the obligation. But their kindness and their generosity to forgive that liberated me to be able to do what I'm doing today. That enabled me to save money where I could go to seminary. And I can never thank them enough for that. And I invite us to sit with this idea that forgiveness isn't just about the wounds that people inflict upon us, but it's about how we liberate people in the systems of the world. Because in our hurting world, our capacity to forgive directly correlates to our capacity to work with God to liberate the oppressed. Jesus tells this parable about this social economic inequality here to help us see that forgiveness is more than just about making ourselves feel good. It's about opening doors and windows and breaking chains for us, the way God does that for us, and then for us to share that same redemptive, liberating forgiveness and freedom to others. And that's where I think we experience the anger of the human ruler in this parable, when this person who has been forgiven their massive debt goes out into one that owed them just a minutia, couldn't forgive it. And I think that's something for us to take into consideration in our everyday life, because I think when we look at the systems of inequality in our world, particularly in the economics, when we're talking about debt and those feelings of obligation, whether it's financial or not, they're so ingrained in us. And we can feel that we are not able to make an impact or make a change, particularly when we're working within a system. We're like, it's too large. How can we? But what I hear Jesus inviting us to see today is that we, in fact, can have impacts. We might not be sitting in the Oval Office, or we might not be the Speaker of the House. Heck, we might not be the CEO of our company. But with whatever job we do, whatever we do in our day in and day out, as a teacher, as a police officer, as a finance person, a lawyer, a doctor, school bus driver, whatever it is, we do have a sphere of influence. And in that space, we can be this agent of liberating forgiveness to so many. It might not count in the millions, which I think our society kind of pushes us to think big in that way. But if we turned our eye away from the big thing that we can't seem to tackle on our own, and we bring it down to who are our neighbors and our friends, in my role in this profession, what influence can I bring here to bring about greater liberation for people around us? That we have the ability to do. And that, I think, is the invitation I hear from Jesus today. When we talk about forgiveness, it's not about just healing ourselves. It is enabling a new life for all. And it starts with those closest to us. So I wonder, and I offer us this question: how is God inviting each of us to forgive this week? To forgive those who have caused pain and wounds to us? How is God inviting us to forgive debts and those attachments of being connected through owning or owing something to someone, or others owing something to us? How is God inviting us to forgive those places? To forgive ourselves, maybe, so that we can receive the redemption and the new life that God has for us, and so that we can share that new life and spread it to the world around us. Friends, how is God inviting us to forgive this week? Amen.